He turned down one of the most famous roles in movie history, Lawrence of Arabia, because he refused to sign his name to a Hollywood contract. That's just one of 12 British legends on this list who had the chance to become full-blown Hollywood royalty and chose, again and again, to walk away instead. Some did it quietly. Some did it in interviews that made studio executives furious. One of them left the entire industry behind for years and moved to India. Stick around, because number one on this list turned down more money than most actors make in a lifetime, for a principle. Rex Harrison won an Academy Award for My Fair Lady and was one of those in-demand leading men of his generation. He was also, by most accounts from people who worked with him, exhausting to work with in the American system, clashing repeatedly with directors and producers over how his films should be run. Here's what's easy to miss about that reputation. It wasn't just difficult actor behavior. Harrison consistently gravitated back to the London stage, where he had more control and treated Hollywood as a place he visited rather than a place he belonged. That's the pattern with almost everyone on this list. The industry tolerated the talent because it had to, not because it particularly liked the man attached to it. Trevor Howard became internationally famous for Brief Encounter, and Hollywood absolutely could have owned his career after that. It never really did. Howard built the bulk of his filmography in Britain, and he was openly unimpressed by the Los Angeles social scene. The parties, the networking, the performance of being liked. This is the part people miss. Staying home wasn't a failure to break through in America. It was a choice, repeated for decades, and choosing the same thing over and over is its own kind of statement. Diana Dors was marketed in the 1950s as Britain's answer to Marilyn Monroe, and RKO Pictures brought her to Hollywood on a big contract to make her a star. Within about a year, it had collapsed. Dors later said, publicly and bluntly, that the whole experience had been about image and exploitation rather than her actual talent, and she came home. And here's what's genuinely unfair about her story. She got blamed in the press for the deal falling apart, when the more honest read is that Hollywood built her a costume, not a career. Richard Harris was nominated for an Academy Award and became a global star through films like This Sporting Life and, decades later, the Harry Potter franchise. In between, he had a famously volatile relationship with studio executives, walking away from projects and clashing openly over creative control. Would you turn down a paycheck to keep control of your own work? Harris did it repeatedly, and it cost him roles other actors would have killed for. Julie Christie won an Academy Award for Darling and was, by the late 1960s, one of the most bankable stars in the world. And then, more than once across her career, she deliberately stepped back, choosing a quiet life in rural Wales over the machine that wanted to keep her in front of cameras. This is the part that's actually wild. In an industry built entirely around wanting to be seen, Christie is one of the only people who consistently chose not to be. That's rarer than talent. Peter O'Toole was nominated for Best Actor 8 times and never won, a record that says less about his talent and more about the room he was in. He was famous for being irreverent in interviews about the Academy's politeness culture, and he never relocated permanently to Los Angeles the way many of his peers did. Here's the pattern worth noticing. Hollywood kept nominating him for 30 years. It never quite figured out how to fully claim him. David Niven had one of the longest, smoothest Hollywood careers on this entire list. Decades of work, an Academy Award, genuine affection from American audiences. And then he wrote 2 memoirs, The Moon's a Balloon and Bring on the Empty Horses, that gently tore the curtain back on exactly how absurd and vain the studio system could be. This is the part people miss. Niven didn't need to be angry to be devastating. He just told the truth about the party from inside it, with a smile, and that's arguably more damaging than any public feud. Dirk Bogarde was one of the biggest British box office draws of the 1950s, and he turned down a long-term, extremely lucrative Hollywood studio contract to keep working on smaller, riskier art house films instead. He eventually relocated to France and spent the rest of his career and his writing openly critical of what he saw as the commercial shallowness of the American star system. Would you trade guaranteed wealth for creative freedom? Bogarde did, and he never once wrote about regretting it. Terrence Stamp was a defining face of 1960s cinema, Billy Budd, the collector, right in Hollywood's orbit. And then, almost overnight in the early 1970s, the phone stopped ringing. Instead of chasing it, Stamp left the industry behind entirely and spent years living in India. Here's what's different about his story compared to everyone else on this list. This wasn't defiance. Hollywood simply moved on, and rather than fight to stay relevant inside a system that had already decided it was done with him, he let it go completely. Vanessa Redgrave won the Academy Award for Best Supporting Actress for Julia in 1978, and her acceptance speech touched on Middle East politics in a way that triggered major backlash from parts of the American industry and public. She did not walk it back. For years afterward, she remained openly unapologetic about what she'd said. This is exactly why her story belongs higher on this list than the others. Everyone else here quietly stepped away from Hollywood. Redgrave stood on its biggest stage and refused to soften herself for it, consequences included. Oliver Reed built one of the most chaotic public reputations in British film history. Unfiltered, unpredictable talk show appearances that mocked the polished, on-message version of celebrity Hollywood PR machines were built to produce. He stayed rooted in the English countryside rather than relocating to Los Angeles for most of his career. Here's the bigger pattern this connects to. The American industry has always rewarded stars who play the publicity game well. Reed simply refused to play it at all, and somehow became more famous for that refusal than some actors ever get for cooperating. Albert Finney is our number one, and his story is the boldest no on this entire list. Every other person here criticized Hollywood, drifted from it, or quietly stepped back. Finney turned down the actual role, Lawrence of Arabia, the part that made Peter O'Toole a legend, specifically because he did not want to sign a multi-picture studio contract that would have owned his career. He later turned down a CBE and then a knighthood, criticizing the honors system itself as, in his words, something that perpetuates snobbery. Across more than 50 years and 5 Oscar nominations, he never moved to Los Angeles. Here's the detail that says everything about him. He skipped the Oscars entirely on the night he was first nominated. He went sailing instead. For most actors, that ceremony is the single biggest night of their career. For Finney, it apparently wasn't worth cancelling a boat trip. If you enjoyed this video, hit like, share it with someone who loves classic film, and subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Drop a comment. Which one of these surprised you the most? See you in the next one. Rules.